sister lied that I'd quit med school, and my parents cut me off. Years later, she landed in the ER where I walked in as her attending physician. I was halfway through my 3rd year of medical school when my parents suddenly stopped answering my calls. At first, I figured they were busy. Then my debit card stopped working. My rent check bounced. My landlord taped an eviction notice to my apartment door. When I finally reached my dad, his voice was colder than I'd ever heard. "You made your choice, Ryan." "What choice?" "You quit med school. Don't ask us for another dollar." "I never quit." Chloe told us everything. My younger sister had convinced them I'd dropped out because classes were too hard. She claimed I'd wasted my tuition money, lied for months, and begged her to keep it secret. None of it was true. That weekend, I drove 6 hours home carrying my student ID, enrollment papers, transcripts, and my latest grades. I wanted to show them everything. Instead, I found Chloe outside the restaurant where my parents were celebrating her graduation. "They don't want to see you," she said. "I have proof." She smiled. "They don't want proof. They believe me." "Why would you do this?" She shrugged. "For once, they were talking about me instead of you." Then she walked back inside. I stood there holding the folder until I realized nobody was coming out. The next Monday, I met with financial aid. Without my parents' support, I needed student loans just to stay enrolled. I worked nights as an emergency department scribe, picked up tutoring jobs on weekends, and survived on cheap groceries for months. Some nights I slept in the hospital call room because driving home would have wasted the little time I had left before class. It was exhausting, but I never quit. Medical school ended. Residency followed. The hours were brutal, but I kept moving. I never called my parents again. They never called me. An aunt occasionally sent updates. Mom believed I'd disappeared. Dad assumed I was working construction somewhere. Chloe happily corrected anyone who asked about me. According to her, I had thrown my future away. Eventually, I stopped wondering whether my parents would ever learn the truth. 8 years passed. I became an emergency physician at a regional trauma center. One Friday night, several crash victims arrived after a highway pileup. The emergency department turned into organized chaos. Paramedics rushed stretchers through the doors, while nurses called out vital signs. Every room filled within minutes. I moved from patient to patient until a nurse handed me another chart. Female, 32, possible internal bleeding. I stepped behind the curtain. Chloe looked up, her eyes locked on mine. "Ryan?" I glanced at the chart. "I'm Dr. Ryan." Training took over. I examined her, reviewed her scans, ordered more imaging, and called the trauma surgeon. Her blood pressure kept dropping. She needed emergency surgery, and every minute mattered. She kept staring at me. "You're really a doctor." I stayed focused on her treatment. A few minutes later, my parents rushed into the emergency department. My mother froze when she saw me wearing a white coat. Dad looked at my badge twice. I thought he couldn't finish. The trauma surgeon arrived. "Family?" They nodded. "He caught the internal bleeding early," the surgeon said. "Waiting much longer could have ended very differently." My parents looked at me without saying a word. They followed Chloe upstairs while I returned to my other patients. Hours later, my shift finally slowed. I found Mom and Dad sitting alone in the surgical waiting room. Mom stood first. "We didn't know." "You could have." Dad looked down. "Chloe told us you quit." "I know. We never asked for proof." "No." The silence between us felt heavier than any argument. Finally, Dad whispered, "We're sorry." I looked toward the hallway. I spent years believing I wasn't worth one phone call. Neither of them answered. A nurse stepped into the room. "She's awake." They hurried away. I stayed where I was. The next afternoon, I reviewed Chloe's discharge paperwork before leaving the hospital. She asked if we could talk. I stepped inside. "I never thought you'd actually become a doctor," she said quietly. I never stopped trying. She lowered her eyes. There wasn't anything left to discuss. A month later, a package arrived at my house. Inside were old family photos, birthday cards they had written but never mailed, and a cashier's check for the exact tuition money they'd stopped paying years earlier. No extra money, no excuses, just the amount they should have trusted me with in the first place. I deposited the check without calling. Later, my aunt told me Chloe had finally admitted everything. She confessed she'd lied because every family conversation eventually became about my future in medicine. She wanted to be the one everyone admired. She got exactly what she wanted. It cost our family nearly a decade. Months later, I saw my parents at my aunt's backyard barbecue. Dad introduced me to a neighbor. "This is our son, Ryan." He paused before adding quietly, "He's the doctor." I shook the neighbor's hand and joined a different conversation. Nobody questioned who I was anymore. They already had the answer. I had spent 8 years proving it without saying a single word.